Hello everyone! This hour on Verbling. The next in my Hot Topic series, we're doing Hot Topic Intelligence and Genes. We'll be reading an article and talking about a new study that sheds light on intelligence, what it is, how we can change it, and many other things. As I said in the description, it's hard to study intelligence in humans, but some researchers have turned to chimpanzees to understand what actually gives rise to intelligence in the human brain. Guess what they found? It might surprise you. That's a little bit about the class. Here's a bit about me. I'm Jon-Eric, your Verbling teacher for this hour. I'm an American teacher from New York, hanging out in Lisbon, Portugal to bring you this class. Here are 3 quick rules to help you participate. Don't forget to turn off, tune in, and open up, which means turn off your microphone when you're not speaking so we can keep the classroom as quiet as possible. Tune in to the new vocabulary words that you're going to learn when you are speaking so that I can correct you and give you feedback. And last but not least, open up to your classmates. Relax and have fun. We're all here to learn, and this is a safe and respectful place to practice your English. And that is a little bit about my class and a little bit about me. Now I want to know a little bit about you, and you'll note, whoops, there we go. Let me get my face on screen. Okay, and you'll notice in the chat window, I posted a link to our document. I'll also post it in the group chat in case you don't have it. There you go. So when you open that up, what we're going to do is, let's see, we're going to start with a few discussion questions just to get a general idea of what you think about intelligence. We've got an article which is short but interesting, and we can decide whether we want to read it straight through or maybe we can divide it up because it's in sections. So in that case, maybe everyone can take a section, read it, and then we'll talk about it together. We can decide what we want to do. And then in terms of discussion, whatever discussion questions that come up in our discussion, I'll post them there in the end. And as a final activity after our discussion, you can do an optional short writing. So we'll discuss it, but you can do a short writing of your opinion based on everything we've talked about, and I'll correct it during the weekend if that interests you. It's up to you. It's optional. But basically, we're going to be reading and discussing the article. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. When you open the link, you will see Hot Topics, Intelligence, and Genes, and you'll see this lovely creature here. This is a monkey. Actually, it's a chimpanzee, our evolutionary cousins. So you'll know you're in the right place when you open that up. You've got the table of contents on the top, and you've got our links underneath. I'm going to start by just reading a little background in the second link. We're not going to read the entire article, but it's a very famous article, and it might be a good introduction to the topic. Okay? So I'll put our monkey back on screen, and I'm just going to read you the very, very, very beginning of that article, and we as class can discuss what we think about this article. This is from a little over 10 years ago. Not the article we're going to read. The article I'm going to read to you as an introduction. It's a famous article in The Atlantic written by Howard Gardner. Howard Gardner is one of the founders of the cognitive revolution, as it's called, the beginning of cognitive science in the 1950s, late 50s, early 60s. And I think he is it's basically the guy running the Harvard education, what is he? Harvard Education Department. He's been there for forever. And he's the guy that came up with the idea of multiple intelligence and popularized it. So this was kind of an important article to the general public. So I think it might be a good introduction to what we're going to talk about. He says in the beginning, 3 unresolved issues will dominate the discussion of intelligence. whether intelligence is one thing or many things, whether intelligence is inherited, and whether any of its elements can accurately be measured. The debate, a premise psychologist argues, is really over the proprietary rights to a fundamental concept of our age. In other words, who owns intelligence? Okay, so here's the very beginning. Almost a century ago, Alfred Binet, a gifted psychologist, was asked by the French Ministry of Education to determine who would experience difficulty in school. Given the influx of provincials into the capital, along with immigrants of uncertain stock, Parisian officials believed they needed to know who might not advance smoothly through the system. Proceeding in an empirical manner, Binet posed many questions to youngsters of different ages. He ascertained which questions, when answered correctly, predicted success in school, and which questions, when answered incorrectly, foretold school difficulties. The items that discriminated most clearly between the two groups became, in effect, the first test of intelligence. Binet is a hero to many psychologists. He was a keen observer, a careful scholar, an inventive technologist. Perhaps even more important for his followers, though, he devised the instrument, I should say, that is often considered psychology's greatest success story. Millions of people who have never heard of Binet's name have had aspects of their fate influenced by the instrumentation that the French psychologist inspired, and thousands of psychometricians, there's a big word, psychometricians, specialists in the measurement of psychological variables. Remember the word metrics, when you can take statistics about something or someone, are metrics. So these are psychometrics, statistics about your psychological state. Thousands of psychometricians earn their living courtesy of Binet's invention. In other words, we're talking about the intelligence test, the IQ test, the concept of IQ. Although it has prevailed over the long run, the psychologist's version of intelligence is not facing its biggest threat. Many scholars and observers, even some iconoclastic psychologists, feel that intelligence is too important to be left to the psychometricians. In other words, IQ tests were being questioned at the time of this article, so this is the late 90s. Experts are extending the breadth of the concept, proposing many intelligence, including emotional intelligence and moral intelligence. They are experimenting with new methods of ascertaining intelligence, including some that avoid tests altogether in favor of direct measures of brain activity. They are forcing citizens everywhere to confront a number of questions. What is intelligence? How ought it to be assessed? How do our emotions and our notions of intelligence, how do our notions of intelligence fit with what we value about humans? In short, experts are competing for ownership of intelligence in the next century. Okay, so that's just a little introduction I was just reading about the background of intelligence, and that monkey that you're seeing on screen is going to be very important very soon. Okay, but we're going to read this article together. So let me just ask you a quick question. If you go to our warm-up, we've got 3 questions. So before we talk about intelligence, let me just ask you, have you heard the expression nature versus nurture? Have you heard that expression before? Hello? Have you heard that expression before, Yuki?
I haven't heard the expression.
Oh, do you know what nurture means? If you nurture a child.
Yes, I know. Not nature means it's a antonym of art. nature.
Antonym of what? Of
I mean the nature. Nature, for example, plants, animal.
right,
Uh,
right. But what about nurture? If
yes,
I
I know. Now I'm explaining about nature. And nurture is another. Nurture, nurture is it's a it's a raising child, raising
right,
um,
right, right, right.
uh, education, feed. uh, it's a feeding and raising child or plant. Mm.
So
It it on the whole it's give education and care uh,
uh,
so that the children can be raised.
okay, maybe the word care is even more important than education when we talk about nurture. Because
Yes.
we usually think about nurture as caring for in terms of even intimacy, nurturing. A nurturing person is very intimate. So if we're talking about intelligence, before we define what it is, before we try to define it, what do you think nature versus nurture? The debate is about nature versus nurture
Mm.
and where intelligence comes from.
Nature is more natural way of, develop not development. It uh, nature
Hmm.
it uh, it it's a quality of being natural. I don't know. Nature it's everything in this world. Um,
Well, the
you
question,
mean here? Nature means nature. It it's a verb. Yeah.
well, to nurture is a verb, nature is a noun. But my question is this. In the debate about intelligence, people often bring up this this idea that we don't know where it comes from. The argument is that the argument is this: is it? Some people say intelligence is related to nature. Some people say it's related to
Ah,
nurture.
I see. I see. It's a expression.
Right.
Yes, it's about how to say innate qualities of
Exactly.
of of, of people people or animals. It's a nature.
Right. 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 That's it. That's
Uh,
it. So
and and after birth, the things people gains after birth, it's a nurture. No, yeah,
yep, that's right.
yes.
So
So
in other words,
for example, environment, education, educational condition, schools, teacher, family, all all children, all that children experience after birth and getting um, experience, it's a nurture.
basically, yes. In other words, in the debate about intelligence, people ask, are you born with it, nature, or do you get it from your experience and environment, nurture? I mean, it's compulsory to go to school in pretty much every country in the world. Well, not every, but almost every country. So the question is, where does it come from, and can people become smarter? So that's the debate, nature versus nurture, and that's what we're going to read about because in the very beginning I was reading an excerpt from Howard Gardner's article where they began to really question what intelligence was, and he proposed a theory of multiple intelligences. This was 15 years ago. There's something new in the study we're going to read about today. So we have to keep in mind the debate between heredity and environment, nature versus nurture. And, well, there's one other important question. What on earth is intelligence? I mean, how do you think we can define intelligence? So I'll leave it up to both of you. Give me a definition of intelligence. What do you think it is?
Intelligence is the ability to understand, to find out, and to think about the situation, gathering information, and on the whole, thinking and thinking about the problem and getting the answer to conduct something.
So it sounds like you're saying it's two things. It sounds like you're saying it's problem solving, and you're also saying that it involves a lot of skills, like gathering information, analyzing the. It sounds like you're saying two things at once. So it's problem solving, but it's also the ability to do all the skills that go along with problem solving. Is that what you mean? So it's not just one thing. It's a lot of skills put together. Yeah? And,
Yes.
and Giuseppe, what do you think about that? Do you think that intelligence is many skills? Or do you think it's really just one thing that you're born with that doesn't necessarily change?
Well, it's kind of difficult to talk about intelligence because it depends on many factors. Depends if you
Depends
have
on
the...
intelligence.
Yep.
Because if I try to talk about intelligence with my cat, he doesn't say anything because he's stupid. But you're not. My cat, not you. So
Giuseppe shows high intelligence.
Of course he does. Of course he does. Because he keeps coming to my class.
No, really. Well,
so
the point.
So you agree with Yuki that it's a lot of things put together, maybe a lot of skills.
Yeah. I was saying that point too, because but you have to work and to focus on work on these skills. If you have the skills, you have to work on it to improve. For example, if you read every day, the language will be more fluently in every. The speaking will be more fluently, and then you will be able to use many vocabulary as much as you can.
Yeah, with language learning, when you reach a certain level, most of the acquisition of new language comes through reading, according to the most prominent language acquisition theorist, I guess you could call him, out there, that he says that's the single most important thing. So in the same way, having exposure to other things, other skills, so we're talking about other kinds of skills besides language learning. Language learning is not really a skill, but skills are involved. It's the same idea. So getting yourself the right exposure. So that's a really good point. It could be this. Do you remember what Einstein is credited as saying about intelligence? He said, imagination is more important than intelligence. People credit him with many quotes, and it's usually not exactly what he said. But in this case, I think it's pretty accurate. I think it is what he said, because his point was he didn't solve the mystery of the universe, come up with the theory of relativity by being intelligent. He came up with it by being innovative and trying to problem solve in a way that really no one had done, or no one had done systematically prior to that point. He literally had daydreams about what it's like to travel really fast, and through creating these kind of mental images and then working out the mathematics behind what he was imagining, he ended up coming up with a solution that didn't require direct observation, right? He literally had these thought experiments, and then try to work out the math behind them. Took a long time, but it seemed to pay off. He seemed to have created something that's still used today and still accurate. So he said that, well, so maybe imagination is intelligence. Maybe that's another point.
I have I have suspicious about the idea that in speaking fluently in foreign language, such a skill of speaking fluently is categorized into the intelligence. I don't think so. Intelligence is the ability to think in the right way and understand well and make a decision. I think speaking language is another ability.
Yeah, it's the ability to parrot a lot of times.
Some people speaks foreign language automatically. I think it is not involved in the category of intelligence.
Yeah, I agree completely with that. I agree. There's a famous polyglot who speaks really well, 23 languages or something. A young kid, 18 years old, and you know everyone's very impressed, and he's great. You know, he does a really good job. I've seen another polyglot who's not famous because he's from a country where it's hard to be famous. He's from the Ukraine. The first one's American, and he doesn't speak nearly as fluently, but he speaks much better because he's able to express thoughts in those languages.
Yes. That I want to say.
Yeah,
I mean,
agree.
So every excellent polyglot isn't intelligent.
Isn't necessarily intelligent.
It is necessarily intelligent.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think the reason that people are so impressed with the first polyglot, I won't mention any names, is first, well, both of them are about the same age. But like I said, one's American, so he's famous. The other one is Ukrainian, so he's not famous. But I think the main reason they're impressed with the American guy is because he was a child actor and he was really good at picking up accents. So he sounds convincing. That's one of the reasons. So he's kind of able to fool people in a way. I mean, it's not that he can't speak the languages. It's just that
he can mimic the accent.
Yeah, he's very good at mimicking.
That doesn't mean he's intelligent.
Yeah. No, in his case, I think he actually is. But that's the point. The other kid deserves a lot more credit. Maybe I think on my YouTube channel, I think I saved one of the videos he did. He deserves more credit, but he won't get it because he's in the Ukraine. The country is basically in the middle of a political major problem. It's a lot of things.
Yes,
but
yes.
I understand Portuguese, and I'm listening to this kid who's never been to Portugal or Brazil express ideas in Portuguese, and I'm thinking, well, he can do it. Well, listen, I want to get to the study itself. So if you go down to page 3, you can see we're going to read a new study that sheds light. Understanding chimpanzees' intelligence can shed light on our own intelligence. And look, there is an intelligent monkey. Look at him. Look how smart he is. Look at that guy. I don't know if we'll be able to read the entire thing, but let's get to the gist of the article. Let's get to the main part at least. So the introduction is, a century of scientific investigation into human intelligence has revealed that genes do play an important role in its development, but that cultural and experiential factors can also exert a great amount of control. Intelligence, or IQ, now we have to decide whether we agree those things are the same. Intelligence, or IQ, the score on one of several popular standardized measurements of intelligence, can be modified by an individual's socioeconomic status, for example. A child's early life experiences, such as abusive or neglectful parenting, also impact intelligence. As most things in psychology, understanding the complex dance of genes and environment can become confusing, especially since genes and environment can themselves, be correlated. One popular way to eliminate those complications is to study animals. Okay, you both know what we mean when we say genes, right? Everyone's clear on genes?
Yes.
Yeah? So that's when we're talking about heredity, we're talking about genes being
Genes,
passed.
what people inherit from his parents.
From their parents.
From their parents.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So we're going to talk about the impact of this new animal study and what it says about intelligence. Maybe you'll find it surprising. I did. So Yuki, why don't you start us off with early approaches to animal intelligence? We'll get a little background first.
Okay. Early approaches to animal intelligence. Animal intelligence has long been of interest to psychologists, ethologists, and anthropologists, but until fairly recently, the overwhelming majority of studies has taken a behaviorist approach. It's an approach that largely screws
Eschew. Even I have trouble with this word. Eschews.
It's an approach that largely eschews biology in favor of experience. Think Skinner and Watson.
Right. So here, the word eschews means that it
avoid.
Okay, basically something like avoid, right? In other words, eschews biology, so it places less importance on biology than experience. We were talking about language learning earlier. Just a quick point. The beginning of modern linguistics came from criticizing Skinner because the idea that children learn by mimicking in the way that a rat learns to navigate a maze was pretty much discredited by a very young Noam Chomsky when he said, if that's true, how is it that children can learn to speak with very little, sometimes, well, very little and very poor experience in language learning? Sure, they have a lot of time, but basically they start speaking, within 2 years, and there isn't enough time to be exposed. In other words, they seem to have more output than input. How is it possible that it's mimicry if they have more output than they do input? Why are they able to pick up certain structures? They make certain mistakes, like overgeneralizing, like the car goed there instead of the car went there. But they won't say something structural. They won't make structural mistakes. So he argued that that means that they have inherited language. It's something genetic. And for some reason, that's still controversial today. I don't really know why that's controversial, because we inherit many things. We inherit the ability to grow limbs. We inherit the ability to, whatever. We don't have to think about our breathing. We don't learn to do that. So I'm not sure what the controversy is, but it's still some controversy there. And it's still up for debate in many circles. Anyway, just an example of what we're talking about with Skinner and who Skinner was. Sorry to interrupt. So keep going, Yuki.
It has only been in the last couple of decades that animal behavior researchers have begun to think about the sociobiological factors that contribute to animal behavior and cognition. And even more recently, that researchers have begun to think seriously about individual differences among animals when it comes to intelligence and cognition. Now that measurements for non-human intelligence have started to catch up with those that have been developed for understanding human intelligence, researchers in a position to turn to animals in order to
in a position to
sorry,
turn.
researchers are in a position to turn to animals in order to better understand the development of intelligence. Just how important are genes? How much can experience really push things around?
All right. So if you had to sum up the gist of this part of the article, Yuki, how would you sum up the gist in this first part in a sentence or two? What's the main point?
The gist of the first part of this article is a certain position, a certain approach of human intelligence, animal intelligence. It's a behaviorism, yeah. Such an approach emphasizes the aspect of human behavior. So, animal, I think they investigate the animal's behavior, and they began to think about the factors that contribute animal behavior.
Right,
and it's close relationship between behavior and the way of thinking.
Well, there's one point we got to emphasize: sociobiological. This is the new thing. So the
sociobiological factors.
Right. So the biological, we call this underpinning, the biological basis for the behavior. And so the difference is that now the ways that we study intelligence in humans and in animals for that matter have matured. So maybe we have better ways than ever before. But the biological factors were not looked at before. It was more behavior than biology. So now the biology seems to have caught up. It has maybe matured and we can reach new conclusions. So it's the biology that's the new thing. Perhaps. Genes, that's still pretty recent. Genetic research that's advanced. Okay, let's see. Oh, look, we've got Hussein as well. Hi, Hussein.
Hello, John.
So we did a little introduction where we talked about the background of intelligence. I mentioned multiple intelligence theory by Howard Gardner and the fact that people began to question what it was. And I talked about the beginning of intelligence, the IQ test by Binet, and how that influenced, well, really the whole 20th century. Then we're looking now at, then we turn to this article that says new animal studies show us something very new and possibly unexpected about intelligence. Because now, as Yuki just said, it's not just behavior, but it's the biological basis for behavior that's being studied. So that's where we are with our discussion so far. Giuseppe,
most important thing is how important are genes here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How important genes are, exactly. So Giuseppe, you take the next part, and Hussein, you're going to take the part after that, and then we'll discuss the article. It's pretty short. Go ahead, Giuseppe.
Researchers William D. Hopkins, Jamie Lee Russell, and Jennifer Schaffer from Georgia State University and the Yerkes National Primate Research Center in Atlanta turned to chimpanzees. They administered the primate cognition test battery to 99 adult chimpanzees ranging in age from 9 to 54, from whom they also have the genetic data and information on their relatedness among each individual. The battery is comprised of 13 tasks, which measure spatial cognition, numerical cognition, causality, and social cognition. The tasks are very straightforward. One of the tests for measuring spatial cognition, for example, involves a researcher hiding food in 2 or 3 cups. In the chimpanzee, has good spatial memory, it should look for food in those of the cups rather than in the third, empty cup.
Keep going.
If you scroll down, please. Thank you. After combining the chimpanzee's performance on the IQ test with various genetic data, the researchers discovered that 50% of the variation in intelligence was due to genetic factors. When it came to specific environmental factors that the researcher considered, neither sex nor rearing history contributed.
Rearing is nurture. We talked about nature and nurture. So when you rear children, you nurture the children, you raise them. How were you reared? Oh, I was reared by living in the country and living off the land. Rearing just means raising children, okay?
Okay. Rearing history contributed significantly to chimps' intelligence. That is, whether they were raised by humans or by their mothers, they did not significantly impact their intelligence once they become adults.
I think we need to pay attention to this sentence. Whether they were raised by humans or their own chimpanzee mothers did not significantly impact their intelligence once they became adults. So that either means that nurture is less important than nature, or it means that humans are just as dumb as chimpanzees. I don't know which, but we need to think about that. That's a joke, by the way.
It was good.
All right. So Giuseppe, let's finish up this section, and then Hussein, we're going to turn it over to you for a useful comparison. Okay? Last two paragraphs there.
The researchers then broke the chimpanzees' performance down by skill set and discovered that while all aspects of intelligence had some variation that could be attributed to genetics.
Could be attributed.
Contributed. Okay. Variation in spatial and social communication skills were in particular influenced by their genes. Variation in the chimp's understanding of causality reflected fairly little genetic influence. Impressively, the researchers managed to retest 86 of the original 99 chimpanzees after some time had passed. Not only did the overall measure of intelligence heritability.
Wait. Slow down again. Slow down. Heritability. Good.
Hold up the second time, but the individual tasks sorted in a nearly identical pattern, with the performance and tasks related to spatial and social cognition divided into two clusters. But both the structure and the heritability of intelligence held up across the different assessments of the same group of chimps. In humans, intelligence is thought to remain fairly stable over time. The same appears to be true for chimpanzees as well.
Okay, by the way, just one thing. The word performance has a stress on the second syllable. Not performance, but performance.
Performance, okay.
Yeah, performance. Okay, so again, same thing with you, Giuseppe. Try to give us the gist of this part of the article in a statement or two. So what does it boil down to from what you've read so far? What do you think? What's the main idea?
Well, the main idea is in this part of the task. They are talking about the cognition. That the connection of the chimpanzees does not does not face any changes despite of environment.
Well, so you can say is not influenced or is not greatly influenced by.
Is not greatly influenced by environment or genes or if they are close to humans, or if they are grew up by humans, or he's
If they are reared by humans,
if they are reared by humans, or
right?
chimpanzees.
Yeah, and maybe I would just say one thing. I would not include genes in that list. Everything else you said I agree with. But according to the article, it's not that genes don't affect it. In fact, they haven't really mentioned it, but it seems, if anything, that it is the genes that have a bigger effect, because when they retested them, right, every time they tested them, they came out about the same. So it seems like it had less to do with human influence. So I would just take out the genes part, but everything else you said I agree with. It seems that there was no major difference whether they were human-reared or chimpanzee-reared. Intelligence seemed to be the same. And remember, these chimps were from 9 years old to 54. They were middle-aged chimps in some cases, and they seemed to be roughly the same in terms of intelligence. They didn't seem to be greatly different at a younger age. So if intelligence is not genetic, if intelligence is environmental, then you would think that younger chimps would be stupider. But that's not necessarily what was shown. So we're going to talk about this in just a minute, but Hussein, let's give you
any good education doesn't work for chimpanzee.
has little influence on chimpanzees, or we would imagine people, actually. No, that's not what they're saying. Higher level thinking is another story. But basic intelligence, it seems, I think that's what they're talking about, because it's like basic. I don't really understand, because it seems like they're giving them memory tasks, but I'm not quite sure I understood that, because memory is different. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. So Hussein, let's read this part. A useful comparison. Okay, and let's see. It's 1, 2. Hold on. 1, 2. Oh, that's the end. Okay, yeah. You can read the end of the article for us.
A useful comparison from
useful with an S.
Useful.
Good.
A useful comparison. From an evolutionary standpoint, the results reported here suggest that genetic factors play a significant role in determining individual variation.
Determining
individual variation in cognitive abilities, particularly for a spatial cognition, spatial cognition and communication skills. Presumably, these attributes.
Here's the first syllable. Attributes.
These attributes would have conferred advantages to some individuals, perhaps in terms of enhanced foraging skills or increased social skills, leading to increased opportunities for access to food or mating. That isn't a particularly surprising or novel statement on its own. We already knew that genes have an important job when it comes to intelligence and cognition. But what's useful is that we can assume chimpanzee intelligence isn't influenced by factors like socioeconomic status, the quality of their social districts, or any of the...
Wait. Their school districts.
Their school districts.
Mm-hmm.
Right, of their school districts, or any of the dozens of other variables. Other variables, both obvious and subtle, that influence human development.
Sorry, I gotta interrupt again. Sorry. Look, this word is special because it's written differently than we say it. Like the word castle. The word castle, we don't read the T. Here, it's the same.
Subtle.
Well, no, sorry, subtle. We read the T, but we don't read the B. So subtle.
Yeah. Both obvious and subtle, that influence human development. That means we can examine the genetic side of their intelligence more easily. With a basic understanding of the proportion of cognition that can be attributed to the genetics.
Wait. Attribute is not the same as attributed. When it's a verb, right, when it's an action, we switch the syllable to the second. That's a common theme in English. When you have a noun, it's a word like record. When it's a verb, we switch it and it's record. So attribute is the noun, and to attribute is a verb. So here it's attributed.
Attributed.
Good.
Can be attributed to genetics. Researchers now have a place to start if they want to use the evolution of chimpanzee smarts as a comparison point for our own.
Right. Well, I interrupted you a lot, so let me.
It was good for me.
But I want you to just. I want you to give the gist of this, but it's going to be hard because I interrupted you. So I'm going to read this last part again really quickly, and then afterwards I want you to sum it up for me. So just pay attention to the meaning. Forget about the words, the pronunciation and stuff. Just see if you can get the gist, okay? So listen carefully. A useful comparison. From an evolutionary standpoint, the results reported here suggest that genetic factors play a significant role in determining individual variation in cognitive abilities, particularly for spatial cognition and communication skills. Presumably, these attributes would have conferred advantages to some individuals, perhaps in terms of enhanced foraging skills. Foraging means looking for food. Enhanced foraging skills or increased social skills, leading to increased opportunities for access to food or mating. That isn't a particularly surprising or novel statement on its own. We already knew that genes have an important job when it comes to intelligence and cognition, but what is useful is that we can assume chimpanzee intelligence isn't influenced by factors like socioeconomic status, the quality of their school districts, or any of the dozens of other variables, both obvious and subtle, that influence human development. That means we can examine the genetic side of their intelligence more easily. With a basic understanding of the proportion of cognition that can be attributed to genetics, researchers now have a place to start if they want to use the evolution of chimpanzees' smarts as a comparison point for our own. So that's kind of a, it's kind of, but let me ask Hussein first. Just Hussein, what do you think, what would you say is the gist of that last part? Because there's kind of a lot going on there, but if you had to sum it up in a statement, what would you say? What's the main idea of the last part?
I think as far as I understand, the main idea is that the genes are important when it comes to chimpanzees' intelligence, but which is the things like socioeconomic factors and, for example, the ones who raise the chimpanzees are not that important. The genes are really important. The intelligence are affected by chimpanzee genes, not by their socioeconomic environments and the other stuff related to.
And that part about socioeconomic status, that was a little bit of a joke, actually, right? It's true, but they're making a bit of a joke because in the United States, especially under George W. Bush, there was a big movement that some people disagreed with to rate the school according to whether students were passing tests. It's still going on under Obama. It's called No Child Left Behind, and people felt that it was severe and draconian, meaning that if students weren't passing tests, the school would lose funding, and it was, a lot of people say it was unfair. So there's a big debate. Obviously, chimpanzees don't have a socioeconomic status, but they're trying to make a point that, you know, this touches heavily on the debate about intelligence and where you come from. Should inner city kids be evaluated in the same way as upper middle class kids in the Hamptons or something like that. So they're making a joke, but it's not entirely a joke. There is some serious. So Yuki, let me ask you about that last part.
Yes.
What do you think the correlation is for people? They said this could be the starting point to compare chimpanzee intelligence, because it seems that we know it's genetically based more than environmentally based. Well, it's only one study, so we don't know for sure, but that's what it seems like. What do you think? What's the impact for people now?
I found that the most important, most interesting point of this article is that not only is that chimpanzee has a good spatial memory, and perhaps they have good communication skills, and also they have their intelligence not affected by the nurturing. Most of their intelligence is influenced by the genes. That means that spatial cognition and communication skills are difficult to obtain after birth. So is that true? Maybe I'm thinking rightly. So another skills, for example, obeying the rule of society, or maybe thinking about the math problem, and maybe good skill of programming is can be attained after birth. But good communication skill is difficult to gain after birth. So is it true?
Well, let me ask Hussein. What do you think about Yuki's idea? Do you think that he's on the right track with what the study means for people?
I didn't quite understand what you said.
Yuki, give us the gist.
Sorry.
Give us the short version.
Firstly, chimpanzee's intelligence is influenced mainly by the genes. Yeah.
Right.
It is what Hussein already said.
Right.
But secondly, here it is written that chimpanzee has a good spatial memory.
Right.
Yeah. And good communication skill. That means such a ability, like spatial cognition and communication skill,
these sorts of abilities, or these kinds of abilities, we don't say such.
Sorry, these kind of ability can be attained, can be gained, difficult to gain after birth.
Right. So they're more hereditary than environmental.
It depends on the genes.
Right. That's exactly what I got out of it too. That's the impact. I agree with that. In other words, what I'm saying is your observation about what is inherited and what isn't, I agree. I think that's what it says as well. It's not explicit, but I think that's what they're trying to say. So if that's true, Hussein and Giuseppe, if it's true that the basis of communication is really more inherited, what does that mean for us? I mean, we can speculate a little bit about what that means. I got the camera on the wrong person. We can speculate about what that means if we need to reevaluate. Well, let me ask you this. Do you think we need to, if this study has big implications, if we can look at what Yuki was just saying, do you think that means we need to reevaluate how we educate humans? Do you think, I'm not saying the study goes that far, but I'm saying if it's true that these basic skills are genetic, does that change the way we educate humans? What do you think, Hussein?
I think it's not quite true. If for example, the communication skills are entirely coming from genetics, I think they can be they can be taught to children. We can learn how to communicate afterwards. It does not come from entirely our genetics, I think.
Right.
But maybe when we talk about like the animals behave like what their genetics say to them, but they can be taught as well, I think. It's
They
not
can be
quite true.
they can be taught as well.
Yeah, they can be taught. They can learn how to behave. They can learn how to communicate more easily. Maybe I think
Okay.
it's not very true. I think to say like it comes entirely from genetics.
Mhm.
I don't know, because
But
there are some people who can change their behaviors. There are people who can be cured. For example, there are some people who have really bad behaviors and they must be changed, so they can be changed. They really, yeah. I think it does not come from entirely genetics.
well, let's keep something in mind. Let's go back to language for a second. We know this to be true because there's one horrible case study where this was pretty much proven. It's only one case study, but still, it suggests a lot. If you don't expose a human child to language by a certain age, the child will never be able to speak. And we know that to be true because of the famous case of Jeannie, who was an abused child who was never taught to speak. And when she was rescued from her family, her abusive family, when she was, I think, 18, she was able to communicate with her hands. She was able to gesture. She showed intelligence, but she's still alive, by the way. She never gained the ability to actually for recursion. She couldn't say things like that. She couldn't embed statements inside of each other. She could say simple declarative statements like she was pointing at things, very simple ones. And she was very frustrated. So
there was a case that the girl the girl raised by the wolves has been found in Africa, jungle somewhere.
In Russia too. In Russia, in Siberia.
Maybe in Siberia.
Yeah.
I don't remember. But
in Siberia was a boy, I think.
After finding, she was moved to the laboratory, and researchers try make their best to give education to her. She showed the big possibility to communicate with people, but she didn't talk. She didn't speak human language until her end. So that shows that communication skill is inherited genetically, but other things afterwards can be obtained, maybe.
Mm-hmm. And Giuseppe, to finish class today, I just want to know, if you were raised by wolves, would you rather speak wolf or would you rather speak English? What would you prefer?
Wolf.
Wolf. I'd rather speak wolf, I think. So, Giuseppe, you've got the final word on our debate. Do you think that this study shows us something new and important? Should we change the way that we educate people, perhaps? Hussein is making the point that it's not all genetics, and I agree, it's not all genetics. But the article ends with this sentence that we now have a clear starting point because we know that their behavior is genetic, their intelligence is genetic, so we can study animals in a better way. You know, I guess what I'm thinking is this: if we see that genetics plays a much bigger role than we thought, a much bigger role than behavior than we ever thought, then that means that the way we test people has to reflect that. In other words, we have to change the test and make it adaptable to the student, not make the student adaptable to the test, because it would be unfair, if we're looking at genetic influences, it would be unfair, perhaps. Well, I don't know, but that's just actually my idea. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it would be the opposite. If intelligence is mostly genetic, or we think it is, maybe everyone will take the same test. Actually, now that I think about it, maybe it's the other way. I don't know. I'm just saying, my question really is just what impact do you think this might have for people? Because we're studying chimpanzees to know more about ourselves. So that's one thing I would think of is how we do testing. What do you think might be the impact of this study?
Well,
Yeah.
from my standpoint, so far we face many challenges. Depending on researchers, tests, and others. In other words, researchers are good because they are made in order to improve our life, our capacity, our ability, and so on. And I guess it could have probably good and worse benefits. We don't know if we don't make any test and any arrangement about that.
So we need more research, in other words.
We need more research. Exactly.
Well,
for sure, probably it could related to the education could be very useful because could be a further step in our life.
Yeah,
step forward in our life. I mean.
One thing I was trying to say before, I think I lost my train of thought. One thing I was trying to say was, with the case of Jeannie, the girl who never learned to speak, and a lot of other things, she was also physically underdeveloped. They thought that she was a 12-year-old girl, so she was actually 18. So being severely abused and deprived of, she was in a basement her entire life. It was some terrible thing. So she had physical developmental problems as well. So they're trying to say that environment is important because it turns the genes on, right? In other words, there may be a gene for language, which we haven't found, but it seems very clear that there is. And if the environment doesn't stimulate it, it doesn't get turned on. If you don't switch the gene on, you don't have the ability. So one thing that I think from reading this article is that it gives greater importance to how rich your environment should be to turn on the right genes that lead to you being a full human being and reaching your potential. So if you're put in a unstimulating environment with little stimulation of the kinds that we need to foster, mental intelligence and physical intelligence, physical growth and mental intelligence, we're not going to get smart enough people. So it almost seems to me to mean that we need to have better kindergartens and preschools, because a lot of things are going to be set up including even child rearing skills, because a lot of things will be set up that will have greater impact later on. If you don't stimulate them early, then they're not going to develop as quickly or as greatly as they could. So it seems like the earlier the better is a message that I get. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? In other words, you've got to have a rich environment to stimulate the genes, to turn them on. So if you grew up in a place where there's no compulsory education until you're 15, that could severely curtail your education, because you just might not stimulate the thinking that you want to think. So environment is there to affect the genes as well. Does that make sense? It's a little hard to explain.
I think it makes sense.
Oh, okay.
I think a problem is what genes is in your nobody know that what genes is on your head, and what genes have to be turned on.
Right.
So sometimes parents educate their children with very tightly schedule. That heavy burden, the heavy burden on the children. So it sometimes ruin the children.
They're very rigid in the education.
Yes. I still I don't know how what percent what kind of potential is on my brain. What genes is sleeping, and I'm afraid that many of my genes is still turn off, but but I don't know what genes is in my head waiting.
Hussein,
waiting open.
what genes should we turn on in Yuki? What do you think, Hussein? Any opinions about this?
No.
Oh.
I have no.
What genes do you think we ought to turn on in people in general? For me, the main impact about this is really about education and early education. That's what the study means to me. If it's true, it's just one study, but if we take it seriously, it means something like that. So, what do you think ought to change in early intervention and early education? Do you think there's a change that needs to be made to stimulate children earlier?
I don't know, maybe. Yeah, there can be.
a good safe answer. Well, you've got a picture of a kid smoking a pipe. So do you think we ought to introduce pipe smoking earlier?
No, of course not. People shouldn't. I really don't smoke. I used to smoke, but right now I don't, and it's a harmful thing. People shouldn't do that, I know. And maybe if we have a chance to teach something to children, we can teach that they shouldn't smoke in early years.
And they can dress up like Sherlock Holmes. I think the kid looks like Sherlock Holmes. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I think.
Okay. Well, we're a bit over time. We've got to stop. Hopefully, this gets you thinking a little bit about intelligence. There's a quote somewhere from Bertrand Russell, a guy who thought a lot about intelligence. And I don't remember. I was trying to find it, but I couldn't find it. I don't remember exactly what he said, but it was basically this. He said he's famous for saying, people would rather die than think, and in fact they do. That's one of his famous quotes, right? People would rather just stick to their own stupid beliefs rather than think and challenge how they see the world. But then he went on to say, and I wish I could find this quote, but it was in an interview, and I remember seeing it even on YouTube. But he went on to say that when it comes to intelligence, we're fortunate because that's one thing we can improve. So this is one of the smartest guys in the 20th century, who affected philosophy and mathematics and education, and he won the Nobel Prize for literature, for nonfiction writing, whatever. And it always surprised me that he said that, because until that point, I guess I had really thought of intelligence as something that could be improved. But he seemed very convinced that it could be. So if I can find the clip, I'll show it to you later. But I think what he had in mind was something along the lines of what we've been talking about, that if you can, especially if you intervene early and you can, challenge people to think, maybe we'll make smarter kids, and those will be smarter adults, and then we'll have a smarter society. Think about that. Think about that for now. All right. I've got to go. We're a bit over time. Okay. I'll be back on Monday for pronunciation practice. And for the next in our business class, we're finishing up a unit on motivation at 11 GMT on Monday. Have a great weekend, everyone. Bye for now. See you soon.
Have a great weekend.